There are books missing from behind me. Can you tell what today's episode's gonna be about? My name is Kat, this is KittyCatThang, and today I'm back with more book recommendations. I have been having so much fun with this particular little series. I enjoy being able to talk about the books that I love with you guys and hear back from you about the books that you like. Today's subject is going to be apocalyptic fiction. Now, apocalyptic fiction is a little bit of a broad category, so again I've had to split this one into two. I've got young adult apocalyptic fiction, which is like the typical dystopian genre that you're used to, and then I have regular adult apocalyptic fiction, which is a slightly different genre, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. That's pretty much all I have to say about this, other than this is one of my favorite genres of fiction. I don't know why, but there's something about reading about the end of the world or after the end of the world that is incredibly interesting to me. It tells me a little bit more about the human character, if that makes any sense. We're going to start things off with the young adult apocalyptic fiction category. In this one I've got 3 books to show you, and I'm pretty sure they're books pretty much everybody has heard of, but they're some of my favorite series, so I thought, why not? The very first book on our roster today is The Hunger Games franchise. Yes, it is incredibly popular, and there is every reason for it to be. It's incredibly detailed with a rich world that works on its own specific rules and categories that make sense in the context of the history that was written into the story. There's something to be said about an apocalyptic world that mirrors the real world but takes it to its extreme and shows us logical reactions to that extreme. It's interesting to see the world of Panem and be able to draw clear parallels between that world and our own, even if that is a little bit frightening right now. But to the summary. Could you survive on your own in the wild, with everyone out to make sure you don't live to see the morning? In the ruins of a place once known as North America lies the nation of Panem, a shining capital surrounded by 12 outlying districts. The capital is harsh and cruel and keeps the districts in line by forcing them all to send one boy and one girl between the ages of 12 and 18 to participate in the annual Hunger Games, a fight to the death on live TV. 16-year-old Katniss Everdeen, who lives alone with her mother and younger sister, regards it as a death sentence when she steps forward to take her sister's place in the games. But Katniss has been close to dead before, and survival for her is second nature. Without really meaning to, she becomes a contender. But if she is to win, she will have to start making choices that weigh survival against humanity and life against love. The Hunger Games series is an interesting one because it takes the perspective of a child in a world where she's not allowed to be a child. Katniss Everdeen is 16. She's still a kid when all of this happens to her. She becomes the leader of a revolution at 16 years old. Any of us who are past the age of 16 can look back at reading these books when we were kids and think, why did I think this was reasonable? Why did I think I could do this? The fascinating thing for me is that the Hunger Games series dives into the psychology of post-traumatic stress disorder and how it reacts to certain situations given ongoing trauma. Katniss is a traumatized person. Everyone in this book is a traumatized person. Everyone in this entire book series is traumatized. And each of their traumas is explained in a logical way and their reactions all make sense. And I think that might be the saddest part, because when people are doing things that we see as completely outrageous and immoral and impossible, they make sense to us and we understand why they did them, even if we don't like what they did. It gives context to real-world issues like post-traumatic stress disorder, reactionary media, tyrannical governments, big oppressive issues, and revolutionary action. The world of the Hunger Games is not as unlikely as it seems, and that is terrifying, but also fascinating. It's interesting to see how these things work, without having to go through the problems that they present in real life. I think that's a big bonus with apocalyptic fiction, is that you can take these events that nobody would ever want to live through and analyze them from the eye of fiction. It takes a lot of thinking. The next one on our list for young adult apocalyptic fiction is the Divergent series by Veronica Roth. I actually really liked the Divergent series. There was a little controversy when it came out that it was just copying the Hunger Games series, but I think It's just in the same genre and runs on the same kind of idea of a post-apocalyptic world run in specific sections, so people kind of took that and ran with it. There were some big issues with how Divergent is set up, so there are a lot of plot holes with how that actually functions, but the actual story itself is very, very good. It is good to look at what defines us as people and what we as a culture choose to define us as people, because the whole point of Divergent is choosing what defines you. So, summary time. One choice decides your friends. One choice defines your beliefs. One choice determines your loyalties forever. One choice can transform you. The basic premise of Divergent is that Beatrice, our main character, is living in a society that's divided into 4 different factions. Abnegation, which is where Beatrice is from, is the faction entirely devoted to selflessness and acts of service to other people. Erudite is the faction completely devoted to knowledge and the gaining of knowledge for yourself and your community. Amity is the faction completely devoted to peace and well-being for yourself and others. And Dauntless is the faction completely devoted to bravery and showing yourself to be brave, strong, and capable. When Beatrice is given the opportunity to choose which faction she will spend the rest of her life in, she chooses Dauntless, which is a big deal for somebody from Abnegation. The general tradition is that you stay with your faction. It's faction over blood. So by choosing a completely different faction, she's chosen over her family. She's chosen over the society she has known all her life. This is a big choice, and it means completely redefining who she is and why she stands for what she does. And it's fascinating to look at the psychology behind Beatrice's choice and the choices of the other characters in the book. Her brother, her love interest, her friends. It's interesting to look and see who decides to go where and why. It's interesting to see the mentality of faction before blood. It is important to note that in this series, who you are is defined more by where you come from and where you choose to go than it is by your personal assets and your family. This is completely different to how our society functions, and I think it's an interesting case study to look at what it means to be a person and a part of a society, what it means to have a personal identity. That's a big part of this book, and I love the way that Veronica Roth delves into it. She's very good at looking into why personal choices matter in the case of identity, which is a really big deal to a lot of people who are reading this. The main audience for this is teenagers who are discovering who they are and how they fit into society. If they're given role models who don't fit into the society they're born into, they are given a new perspective on what it means to fit in, and the idea of found family rather than being stuck with the people you're born with. The last book in our young adult apocalyptic fiction section is Matched. I love the Matched series. Somehow it never caught on quite as much as Hunger Games or Divergent or all that, but it's a really fascinating take. I really like what the author did with it. Let's go to the summary before I start talking more about it. In the society, officials decide who you love, where you work, when you die. Cassia has always trusted their choices. It's hardly any price to pay for a long life, the perfect job, the ideal mate. So when her best friend appears on the matching screen, Cassia knows with complete certainty that he is the one. Until she sees another face flash for an instant before the screen fades to black. Now Cassia is faced with impossible choices. Between Xander and Kai, between the only life she's known, and a path no one else has ever dared follow. Between perfection and passion. Match is fascinating for me for exactly that reason. It is an in-depth discussion of passion versus perfection, meaning the life that we want to live and the life that would be ideal for us to live. It gives a completely new context to the concept of ideal and whether that's something we should strive for, or whether we should strive to do the things that we love, rather than the things that would benefit the most. What fascinates me is Xander's reaction to everything rather than Cassia's. Cassia is a wonderful character. She's fun to follow, she makes a lot of interesting choices, she is our gateway into this world. She knows how it functions, but she also knows how to break the rules. Xander, on the other hand, is completely for following all of the rules of this society. And he's 100% on board with a lot of the choices that this society makes for most of the series. For me, Xander is fascinating because he's not following because he's blind to what other things would be like. He's following because he genuinely believes that an organized system for matching people with their soulmates, with their perfect jobs, with where they should live, is the best way to go about things. He relies a lot on empirical data and the idea of perfection. And I think it's interesting to see him change from completely in support of this to realizing that there is a benefit to following your heart. I like the idea of showcasing imperfections in a society that is perfect, because I personally don't think the idea of perfection actually exists. And it's interesting to me to see what it would be like if we reached a state where we thought we had achieved perfection, and then realized we hadn't. That's the big draw of this book for me. So now we're going to move on into the adult apocalyptic fiction section. And before I even get started here, I'm going to go ahead and say 2 of these books I've already done an in-depth review of on my website, so I'll leave links to that down below. I won't talk about them in as much detail here. I promise I don't want this video to be an hour long. So, without further ado, let's get into the adult books. The very first book in our adult apocalyptic fiction section is Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. I read this one very recently, so I am 100% late to this fandom. But oh my god, I love Good Omens. It's an incredibly fun, strange, quirky take on the biblical apocalypse. Being that I am a Christian, it is interesting to me to see somebody take the words from the Bible and interpret them in a funny, silly way. I can see why there was a lot of controversy about this book, especially from extremely religious groups, because it does take the concept of angels, demons, God, heaven, hell, all of that good stuff, and kind of blend it. It's so funny and it's so silly, and I mean, come on, the show had David Tennant. How can I not love it? Summary time. The world will end on Saturday. Next Saturday. Just before dinner, according to the nice and accurate prophecies of Agnes Nutter, which, the world's only completely accurate book of prophecies, written in 1655. The armies of good and evil are amassing, and everything appears to be going according to divine plan, except that a somewhat fussy angel and a fast-living demon are not actually looking forward to the coming rapture. And someone seems to have misplaced the Antichrist. This is a book that I didn't know I was going to love as much as I would when I first read it. I first read it because there was a TV series coming out, and like I said, I absolutely love David Tennant, so of course I was going to watch this, but I am a big proponent of reading the book before you watch the movie, because I like the idea of knowing the original story before you go into the visual adaptation. Now, this isn't to say that I am completely against visual adaptations of things. Completely the opposite. I love seeing my books become movies, if it's done well. But the big thing with Good Omens is that when I started reading it, I couldn't stop laughing as I was reading it. It's apocalyptic fiction, but it's funny apocalyptic fiction. It's about the not-quite end of the world, according to the biblical rendition of the end of the world. And it follows an angel and a demon who are best friends. What more could you ask for? It's ridiculous, it's fun, it's funny, and it's strangely insightful. Like, it's fun to look into what this angel and this demon see as worth saving in the world, because it's not big things, it's not all of humanity. It's little things, like tea time in a bookshop or going to the Ritz for lunch. I think it's a very fun interpretation of what it means when you say appreciating the little things in life, because if an angel and a demon can come together to save the world for something as simple as their friendship, then we can come together to save the world because, I don't know, we like going out and getting our hair done. This one was strangely topical. I didn't plan that. The next book in our adult apocalyptic fiction section is one of my favorite books of all time, The Host by Stephenie Meyer. Yes, by that Stephenie Meyer. It's the same one who did Twilight. Now, I am not a fan of Twilight. I don't like how it's written, I don't like the movies, I don't like the fandom, I don't like Twilight at all. I never have. But I love The Host. I will never stop raving about it because it is one of the most beautiful, dark, but also hopeful pieces of apocalyptic fiction I have ever read. Summary time. Melanie Strider refuses to fade away. Our world has been invaded by an unseen enemy that takes over the minds of human hosts while leaving their bodies intact. But Wanderer, the invading soul who occupies Melanie's body, finds its former tenant refusing to relinquish possession of her mind. As Melanie fills Wanderer's thoughts with visions of Jared, a human who has avoided invasions and lives in hiding, Wanderer begins to yearn for a man she's never met. Soon Wanderer and Melanie, reluctant allies, set off to search for the man they both love. Featuring one of the most unusual love triangles in literature, The Host is a riveting and unforgettable novel about the persistence of love and the essence of what it means to be human. That hits on something that I love, which is any novel that questions what it means to be human. I mean, I wrote my own novel about that, so of course I love that. I love anything that puts into question what it means to be human, what we qualify as human. There's a concept in literature of personification, which is giving human qualities and emotions to something that isn't human and may not even be alive. I find it fascinating when characters in a book recognize the humanity in something that isn't human, and that's a big part of what the humans in this book do with Wanderer. It's fascinating to me to see someone who is from a completely different society, a completely different species, falling in love with my species. I love the idea of an alien invasion where the alien realizes they are wrong. And that's a really cool thing about The Host. Most invasion stories cast the aliens as completely unsympathetic overlords, or completely unsympathetic destroyers of mankind, without looking at anything from their perspective. I love the idea that an author can take the perspective of something that is definitely not human and make me love them. That is a really big quality of excellent writing to me. And The Host hits that on the head. I love this story, and I have a soft spot for sweet characters that are big, strong characters, and Ian is definitely one of those characters. I love him. The very last book in our adults apocalyptic fiction section is Warm Bodies by Isaac Marion. I know, I won't shut up about this one. I promise, that's definitely not going to stop. I love this series. Summary time. R is having a no-life crisis. He's a zombie. He has no memories, no identity, and no pulse. But he is a little different from his fellow dead. He may occasionally eat people, but he'd rather be riding abandoned airport escalators, listening to Sinatra in the cozy 747 he calls home, or collecting souvenirs from the ruins of civilization. And then he meets a girl. First as his captive, and then his reluctant houseguest, Julie is a blast of living color in R's gray landscape, and something inside him begins to bloom. He doesn't want to eat this girl, although she looks delicious. He wants to protect her. But their unlikely bond will cause ripples that they can't imagine, and their hopeless world won't change without a fight. I love the Warm Bodies series, and yes, it's a series. There are 4 books, check them out. I love it because, again, it takes that perspective of a non-human character, or kind of non-human character, and makes them sympathetic. I love the idea of the zombie apocalypse told from the other side, told from the perspective of the zombies. How cool is that? I can't think of any other work of fiction that does that. I love any book that can take the tropes of the genre that it's written in and completely turn them on their head, and Isaac Marion does that at every turn. Every time we learn something new about R, it turns the apocalypse that we know completely inside out, and changes what it means for the apocalypse to happen. Yeah, the world is ending, but that doesn't mean it's over. It's interesting to me to see the remnants of humanity fighting to save their humanity, and different people's reactions to the end of the world. General Grigio wants to lock everybody away inside of a box. Nora wants to become a nurse and help people survive. Julie just wants to see airplanes fly again. She wants there to be some hope in this gray world, and R is just trying to live. And I think that's an incredibly interesting story to explore. What does it mean to live again? And what does an apocalypse mean for the people that are left over? Can they start again? Is there any hope? Why did this all happen? There are so many questions that you have by the end of this first book that I don't understand why you wouldn't finish the series and listen to the insightful philosophical ramblings of a zombie that are surprisingly deep and emotional and intense. I personally really love Marion's writing style because he employs almost poetic structure in his prose. The things that he writes could be long-form poems, but it's just prose. It's raw, unfiltered emotional thought. And I think that's beautiful. We don't get a lot of unfiltered emotion. So to see it written so plainly and honestly in this book, even though it is fiction, is refreshing and very, very nice. Poetic language will always be something that gets me. I love poetry, and something that's written in poetic language, even though it's not a poem, is amazing to me. And that's all I've got for you today. Apocalyptic fiction, again, is one of my favorite genres, and if you have any recommendations for me that I haven't read yet, please leave them in the comments down below. I love finding new things in this genre. If you have any questions about the books that I've recommended here, or if you want me to do more of this series, let me know down below. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys! The next one on our list for young adult apocalyptic fiction is... Oh, no.